This is perfect control. It should be fun, right? It isn't. This is harder, but it feels better. Movement is a core part of almost every game you'll play. And when it's bad, you know it's bad. But what actually makes movement feel good? Why does one racing game feel tight and engaging, and another just feels like driving on ice? Why does one game's web swinging make you feel like a god, and another's barely sticks? I've broken movement down into 3 key ideas: speed, responsiveness, and flow. Let's start with the most basic one. Speed is the most obvious part of movement, but it's also the easiest to misunderstand. Fast movement isn't automatically better, and slow movement isn't always a problem. What matters is how that speed supports the gameplay. In Resident Evil 8, you move slow. Sprinting is barely a jog, but it works because the whole experience is built around tension. The slower speed gives time for atmosphere to build. It's a deliberate choice that adds to the gameplay, and the pacing is built around it. But when does speed become a problem? Well, that's when you're so slow that it interferes with your ability to interact with the game. For an example of speed done poorly, in Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the most common complaints is that you can't run in camp. Why? Because you spend a lot of time there, and it is agonizingly slow to actually move through it. That is where being slow becomes a problem. Now, take something like Space Marines 2. You're a walking tank, big, heavy, deliberate. The movement? Completely unremarkable. But it works because the movement isn't supposed to be exciting, it's just a bridge, getting you from one big fight to the next. There's no traversal challenge, no tech to master. You jog, you dodge, you arrive, and it doesn't take so long that it grates on you. That's all it needs to do. Then there's Doom Eternal. This game isn't just fast, it demands speed. Every fight is built around momentum. You sprint, you dash, you grapple, because stopping for even a second is a death sentence. It doesn't feel good because it's fast, but because everything else in the game supports that pace. The level design, enemy AI, pickups, it's all there to keep you moving. If enemies couldn't keep up, the speed would make the game worse. So, speed only matters in context. It's not about how fast you go, it's about whether your pace fits the tone, the gameplay, and the world. If movement pulls you out of the game, it's a problem. If it fades into the background while everything else shines, that's fine too. Next up is responsiveness. Responsiveness means that when you press an input that moves your character, something begins to happen, and it's clearly communicated. But don't confuse this with perfect control. Take racing games, for example. You can't stop a car on a dime or take a 90-degree turn instantly, but when you press the button to turn, the car starts responding immediately. That's responsiveness. And honestly, a racing game with perfect control would be boring. If movement is meant to be a core part of the gameplay, not just a means to an end, then perfect control removes any room for skill or mastery. The more intuitive the response is, the better it tends to feel. Because even if something is consistent, if it behaves differently than players expect, it creates friction. Friction is what happens when there is a gap between what the player intends and what the game does, even if it's technically responding. Getting over it with Bennett Foddy is a great example. Aside from the occasional jank, the game is consistent. The hammer always reacts in the same way to the same inputs. Speedrunners prove that. But most people quit early. Not because the game is broken, but because the way it responds to inputs is unintuitive. What you expect to happen and what actually happens are often misaligned, and that gap is frustrating. The brilliance of the game is that it's supposed to feel bad. The friction is the experience. But if you dropped that same movement into a game that wasn't ironic or thematic, it wouldn't work. GTA 5 is another game with bad responsiveness. The controls aren't broken, and they're serviceable, but you move like you're constantly drunk with this weird ragdoll-y feel to stopping and starting. It's consistent, but it's clunky. That's poor responsiveness. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, let's look at Celeste. This is what most people mean when they say a game has tight controls. Your inputs feel nearly instant. Startup on movement is short, end lag is basically non-existent, and you can move through levels with a ton of depth and expression. But even here, there is weight. If you're not dashing, you can't change direction instantly, you have to account for momentum, and there's startup frames on both jumps and dashes. So what makes it responsive is the ability to see instant output from your input. And Celeste even does a few other tricks well, too. For one example, when you press dash in Celeste, the game pauses for 3 frames. So short that most people would never even know that if they're not told it. Everything stops. The level, the timer, the character, the obstacles. The only thing that continues is the music. The pause gives you time to choose your direction for your dash, even if you weren't already holding one. You don't have to be perfect to get what you expect, and that makes the game feel responsive, even when it's technically pausing. Now, if you want to make a game, the correct speed and responsiveness are all you need to make a good movement system. If you're making a game and you just want the movement to be functional, to not bring the experience down, something like Space Marines 2, this is enough. Plenty of great games stop here. Final Fantasy XIV, 7 Remake, most RPGs and horror games, the movement works, it gets the job done. But what makes movement itself fun? What brings it from functional to expressive? That's where we introduce flow. Flow is when movement becomes more than just a way to get from one place to another. It becomes the gameplay itself, something that's satisfying to do and rewarding to get better at. It's not about how fast you move or how responsive it is, it's about whether there's a loop, a skill to improve, a rhythm to find, or a style to express. Web swinging is probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think of fun movement. And that gives me a chance to talk about my favorite version of it in recent memory, Marvel Rivals. I know what you're thinking, but there's a good reason I picked this over Spider-Man 2. The swinging in Marvel Rivals has surprising depth. The map layouts, the need to manually aim your swings, and the movement tech available all make it way more skill expressive than someone might think. You can just use it to go from point A to point B. That's enough to survive, and it can be fun in its own way. But with mastery, you go faster, do more with less, and turn what seems like a basic traversal system into something amazing. And because it's a competitive hero shooter, those moments of great movement feel even more impressive, because they're not just style, they're impact. This is where flow becomes personal. You're not just playing well, you're moving well. Coming back to Doom Eternal creates flow by turning enemy killing into a movement challenge. You don't just stand and fight, you constantly are in motion, chaining abilities, jumps, dashes, and grapples just to stay alive. The better you move, the better you fight. You're rewarded for clean routing, smart pickups, and never stopping. Mistime a grapple, miss a jump, or stop sprinting, it doesn't matter how good your aim is, the whole system collapses and you're going to be restarting that combat. Movement is the gameplay and the puzzle, and it forms an integral piece of what makes the flow of the game fun. Then there's Celeste, a platformer where movement is the gameplay. At first, it's awkward and how you move will be pretty linear, but as you improve, you start to find more possibilities. You push what's possible. Flow emerges through mastery, not from being handed control, but from learning how to use it. For one example, when you dash into the ground in Celeste, you can wave dash. This is a way to get massive horizontal speed, and by being creative with it, you can improve your time massively, or even do entire skips. Not to mention, it's extremely satisfying. And this is just beginner level movement tech. There's entire hour-long videos breaking down all of the crazy things that you can do in that game that people love to do. If they removed all of this tech, people wouldn't love it nearly as much as they do. So, with all that said, what's flow really? Well, it's when the movement itself becomes a gameplay loop. And as long as there's a challenge involved, even if the only reward is going faster, that loop can be incredibly fun. Let's go back to my car demo. Earlier I said perfect control was boring, but that's not the whole story. Your control can be perfect, if the difficulty of achieving what you want with that control is high enough. So how can I make this fun while still keeping it so that the car perfectly follows the mouse? Well, what if we crank the speed, remove limits on acceleration, and make it so that if you're not on the road, there's some sort of penalty? Now that could be a game that anyone else is welcome to make if they feel inspired. So, in conclusion, movement in games doesn't need to be flashy to be good. It just needs to feel right. And that comes down to speed, responsiveness, and when it fits, flow. Some games keep it simple. Others make it the entire experience. If you want good movement in your game, what matters is that it matches the game's goals. Because in the end, for a lot of games, movement is just one part of a greater experience. But movement done wrong can ruin something that would otherwise be great. And now you know what it takes to do it right. Alright, well, yeah, that was a fun video. I really like movement in games, and I've wanted to talk about it for a long time. So, I'm really happy that I finally got this out. This is definitely the longest single sit and record session I've done. And man, I feel like I really worked my voice hard here. Hopefully that doesn't come through too bad in the end. But overall, I'm really happy with this script, and I think it gives a valuable insight to anyone who wants to make a game, or even just doesn't understand why sometimes it feels terrible to walk around and sometimes it feels great. So, yeah, like, comment, subscribe, don't, I definitely want to do either like a gameplay breakdown or a parody video of some sort next, like, just something for fun. But, yeah, if you want to see more videos like this, the next idea that I have is, honestly, are Riot games fun? Because I think they are. And, I mean, that alone is pretty controversial, so, like, let's make a video on it. Yeah, alright, well, see ya.
I can't see